Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shalmali Guttal. I am with Focus on the Global South, and I am joining you from India. On behalf of the Asia-Europe People's Forum, the AEPF, I welcome you all to this online discussion on rights, realities, and struggles, which is anchored by the AEPF cluster on participatory democracy, human rights, migrant and refugee people's rights. This discussion is part of our campaign on the right to dissent and on building solidarities across countries, sectors, and constituencies on the defense of human rights, both individual and collective. Before we proceed, let's go through some logistical information. The first is the issue of interpretation. So firstly, thank you very much to La Via Campesina, especially Cristina Brovia, for helping us with the interpretation. And of course, thank you in advance to the interpreters. So let me hand over to Cristina to explain the interpretation process. Cristina, please, over to you.
Thank you, Shalmali. Hello to everyone. So we have today for this meeting a team of volunteer interpreters from La Via Campesina, namely Sara, Yumit, Chiara, and Clara, that I thank in advance. So you can listen to Spanish and French interpretation by clicking in the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. And I think I will say that also in French and Spanish. Bonjour à tous et toutes. Nous avons aujourd'hui une interprétation en français et en espagnol par un groupe d'interprètes volontaires de la Via Campesina. Donc, vous pouvez écouter l'interprétation en français en cliquant sur le bouton interprétation au fond à droite de votre écran. En español, hola a todos, tenemos hoy un equipo de intérpretes voluntarios de la Vía Campesina que interpretarán en francés y en español, así que pueden escuchar la interpretación en español en la modalidad de interpretación abajo de su pantalla. Bueno, back to you, Shalmali.
Thank you again, Cristina, and thank you again in advance to our interpreters. Without you, I don't know how we would be able to do cross-regional, cross-sectoral dialogues. Okay, moving on to logistics again. Because we have quite a few participants, it's not possible for us to introduce ourselves in person. So I request those who would like to please use the chat function to introduce yourselves. Please also keep your microphones muted and your videos off if you're not speaking. Of course, our speakers and panelists will have their microphones and videos on whenever needed. And I also, as moderator, when I'm not speaking, I will have I will also mute and remove my video. The webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the AEPF website along with the report very shortly after this webinar today is over. Now, the webinar today, our event has 3 parts. And these 3 parts will be co-moderated by my colleague, Andy Rutherford, and by myself, and both of us are co-coordinators of this cluster, organizing this webinar, the cluster on participatory democracy, human rights, migrant and refugee people's rights. So Andy, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, a very good day to everybody, and a warmest of welcomes to this exceedingly timely and important event. And yes, just to say, it's been a privilege to co-organize this with Shalmali and everyone else in the APF cluster. But the biggest privilege is to welcome you all to this event. And I can see the attendees growing by the second, but we have a fantastic selection of coming together, collaboration between the different speakers. And I'm greatly looking forward to the sharing between us all and the discussions afterwards.
Thank you, Andy. So part 1 of our webinar today, our discussion today, is on setting the context and getting a quick overview, perhaps, of the situation of rights and fundamental freedoms in today's world. So just a few introductory words from me. The world is at a conjuncture of multiple intersecting crises of the economy, finance, wars and violent conflicts, climate, environmental and biodiversity extinction, food, public health, and of course also social dislocation and instability that is arising from all these. But none of these crises are new. They've been building up for decades as a result of neoliberalism and global capitalism, and also the predatory actions of corporations and financial investors to maximize profits in every crisis. Most governments have and continue to enable the concentration of wealth and governance power by transnational corporations and social economic elites. And they're doing this through policies that allow extensive privatization, economic and financial liberalization, and the re-regulation of finance and economy to favor markets and large-scale private actors, mostly corporations. Not only are most governments not fulfilling their legal and ethical obligations to protect public interest, especially of the working classes, but they're also retreating from recognition and respect of human rights, both individual and collective. Many governments have used crises as rationales to deepen authoritarianism and to suppress and subvert the exercise of nationally and internationally guaranteed rights and freedoms through legal mechanisms that criminalize dissent of, and criminalize any dissent to the policies of ruling regimes. Yes. Sorry, I'm just getting. Comrade Kango, could you mute your mic, please, just at this point? Thank you. Yeah. And we also can see very clearly that migrant and refugee populations face exacerbated threats from violent conflicts, tightened border controls, and rising social discrimination and racism. Women, persons of different gender and sexual identities, so-called minority communities, it's not a term I like to use, but I'm just using it as an expedient term, are increasingly subjected to religious and cultural orthodoxy, prejudice, and hate speech. And of course, there is discrimination of and against any group or any persons who don't fit the sort of neoliberal urban mold that is becoming a sort of a socioeconomic norm in today's world. But at the same time, resistance to such widespread trampling of people's rights, and these rights, which are not just falling from heaven, these are the results of long and hard-won struggles and marches. So resistance to the trampling of these rights continue in various ways at multiple levels, whether it's union workers, civil society, people's movements, journalists, academics, lawyers. People are defending the progressive aspects of national and international legal systems, and they're also agitating against regressive policies and laws. So today we have 7 very eminent panelists, all of who have been at the forefront of struggles to secure the rights of peoples and communities. And we will hear from them about the threats facing the realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms. But also we will hear from them about the opportunities that are there for us to defend these and to build what Mr. Volker Turk, the present UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, what he has articulated as a human rights economy, one in which the aim of advancing human rights informs all national economic, fiscal, monetary, investment, and business decisions. Too often we have seen rights, freedoms, and people's undermined for so-called financial and economic interests. And it's really, it's good that we have at least now one leader in the Human Rights Commission who is turning this sort of economic system on its head and calling for an embedding of the economy and finance in human rights. Now, our first speaker today in the context setting section is Sofia Monsalve. Sofia Monsalve Suarez is the Secretary General of FIAN International. FIAN is an international human rights organization working for the right to food and nutrition. Before turning Secretary General in 2016, Sofia Monsalve coordinated FIAN's program on land and natural resources for more than 15 years. She has extensive advocacy experience in the United Nations human rights system. also with the Food and Agriculture Organization and the UN Committee on World Food Security. In 2021, she joined the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES Food. Our second speaker in the context setting section is Gianni Tognoni. Gianni is the Secretary General of the Permanent People's Tribunal, based at the Lelio and Lisli Basso Isoko Foundation in Rome. My apologies, Gianni, for not pronouncing your name and the name of the institute correctly. The Permanent People's Tribunal, the PPT, was established in Bologna in 1979, following the 1976 conference in Algiers. And this conference formulated the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Peoples. Since then, the Tribunal, the PPT, has held many sessions in all global regions, including its 45th session on the violation of the rights of migrant and refugee people, with 6 hearings in Barcelona, Palermo, Paris, London, Brussels, and Berlin. The PPT is an international opinion tribunal that's competent to rule on any serious crime committed to the detriment of peoples and minorities. And when our speakers are speaking, I will also post the link for the Algiers Declaration in the chat. So without further ado, I invite Sofia Monsalve. Please, Sofia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shalmali, and good day to all of you. And thank you very much also to the Asian Europe People's Forum for inviting me here today to share some thoughts and reflections with you. Okay, Shalmali, you started contextualizing our dialogue today, and you started referring to these multiple crises that we are confronted with today. So what I want to reflect now is, okay, if that is the case, what are human rights doing for us in order to help us shift the power imbalance? It's not that we don't have ideas what to do, but the problem is that we are not powerful enough yet in societies to change the systems that need to be changed politically and economically. So therefore, my question is, what can human rights do? Should we do as human rights defenders continue doing business as usual? So this is the question I want to start. Or how are human rights supposed to play a role in developing these visions to overcome the system crisis that we are confronted with? For answering that question, I see 3 main challenges. And these challenges are rooted in the struggles of ordinary people and in the territories that we see happening in many countries. And actually, the speakers after me and Gianni will tell about how they are reshaping these systems. But I see 3 challenges. The first one is, I think we need to reground human rights in non-Western, non-capitalistic ways. And here, I think the 2 main challenges is to reconnect with nature and to reshape financial capitalism towards human rights-based economy, Shalmali, as you were referring to the works of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The second challenge, so these are more the conceptual challenges of what human rights are, because human rights are not set in stone forever. They are the outcomes of historical processes and struggles. So therefore, what we have is work in progress, and history continues being written by the struggles of social movements. So therefore, that's what the first challenge I see. The second challenge is to reinvent human rights accountability. And here we have this dilemma whether human rights are a paper tiger or an imperialist weapon, because we see that the implementation and the accountability of human rights and the possibilities of sanctioning human rights violations and abuses is very limited. And it's determined actually by power and geopolitics. So therefore, this is a very important challenge. And the last challenge is to think human rights beyond states. This is a very complex question, and here we are confronted with mainly this development of corporate capture of the UN system and of many states as well, And therefore, this idea now that everything has to become a multi-stakeholder initiative, and we see actually the UN itself multi-stakeholderizing itself, meaning bringing corporations on board and sitting them around the table to decide about the necessary policies. So this is one aspect of the challenge of human rights beyond states, but the other aspect is that in many places in the world, states are, I don't like to use the term failed state, but in many countries, like if you take Somalia, but if you take, for instance, Haiti, or parts of some countries, there is actually no state anymore because there are actually different armed groups fighting each other. So in such a context, how to talk about human rights? Okay, so these are the three challenges that I want to briefly address. I will start with the first one, which I call the regrounding human rights in non-Western ways. And here I think is actually a message of hope. Because, so if you do a Google search of the word nature in the human rights treaties, you won't find anything. So how could it happen that the relationship of communities with nature was not a fundamental thing when we started developing all the human rights framework? So we had to wait for indigenous peoples and their declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples to highlight that our relationships as communities and societies with nature is actually fundamental for our dignity, of course, and for all our rights. And here, as I said, this is good news that we are recognizing this. We have the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and now we also have the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, which are going the same direction of saying that land, seeds, forests are actually extremely important for the social fabric and for the collective rights of all these communities. So here we clearly see that the human rights framework is getting richer if it allows non-Western views about the fundamental relationships in our society, like nature. Because it was actually the Western thinking that nature and societies are separated, the one who got us there to think that it is possible to have for human rights without this relationship to nature. So this is an important development, and therefore we need to encourage more of this to happen in order to better understand what are human rights. And I'm sure that the struggles of migrants, for instance, will totally reshape our ideas of borders and how this our political systems are built. So the second challenge here, as I mentioned, is reshaping financial capitalism. And of the human rights history so far is, of course, closely related to capitalism as well. I mean, the right of property, as you know, is in many constitutions, well, more sacred, if you want, than any other right. So this is really a problem. And here I think that the developments around business and human rights have become also problematic. The idea that companies may be the guarantors of rights is extremely problematic. And the idea that companies will self-regulate themselves just by, doing ticking boxes exercise about human rights. So this is very problematic. But I think that at the same time, we have strong movements also challenging these ideas. And I think that developments around the binding treaty on transnational corporations and human rights is showing the way that we need to have mandatory, obligatory regulation of transnational corporations, that we need to fill the gaps in terms of accountability. But I think we are going even beyond that, and it is when the High Officer for Human Rights, High Commissioner for Human Rights, is pushing this idea of human rights-based economy, is also making the case about taxation. It is extremely important that governments really improve their fiscal policies to tax corporations and this extreme concentration of wealth that we are seeing, not only nationally, but also internationally, to stop illicit financial flows, tax havens, and also all the discussion around debt. It is impossible that we are in the middle of a debt crisis again, and it is impossible that many countries are expending much more on servicing the debt than in actually realizing social and economic rights. So these are very important developments to really reshape financial capitalism so that human rights are not just the maiden of capitalism, but it really tap on the full emancipatory potential of human rights. The second big challenge that I mentioned is about reinventing human rights accountability. We have basically a structure, I'm referring to an international structure, but also the accountability structure at national level is not actually much better. And the first problem here is we have a chronic underfunding of the human rights system. Only 3% of the total UN regular budget goes to human rights. So we have seen in the recent years that sessions have to be skipped, that special rapporteurs are not well staffed. So there are many, many limitations to the very limited system that we have in place because we don't have strong institutions really able to hold accountable powerful states or the powerful corporations. So this is a problem. Then the other problem that we are seeing here is the resurgence of nationalism. The questioning of universal values and norms is on the rise. And the readiness of nation states to follow the recommendations of the UN systems or the rulings of regional and human rights courts is vanishing. Nationalist governments conveniently instrumentalize the colonial and imperial history of international law in order to disregard human rights. Indeed, geopolitics rather than legal or ethical considerations often determine where human rights criticisms and sanctions emerge and against whom they are directed. So there is a need to overcome inherited colonial structures in the human rights architecture. And one possible way to go is to rebalance the role of national, regional, and human rights mechanisms. Another challenge for effective human rights accountability relates to the non-recognition of the primacy of human rights vis-a-vis trade, investments, and property law. Human rights tend to be segregated in specialized human rights bodies, whereas the structural, far-reaching decisions are taken by economic or environmental institutions in total disregard of human rights. So overcoming silos, fragmentation, and lack of policy coherence with human rights obligations at national and international level is one of the most urgent priorities when reimagining the way our institutions are to be designed. The last challenge that I mentioned is how to claim human rights beyond states. And I already referred to the problem with multi-stakeholderism, or the idea that we have to privatize decision-making and policies in the UN system. I referred also to the problems of chronic underfunding, and the corporations are being brought in around the table because they are providing funds and they have the know-how and all the knowledge in many domains like health or food or climate action. So this is a very, very worrying development because it's blurring the lines about who is responsible for realizing rights, who are the duty bearers, the states, and who are the rights holders, peoples, and therefore is providing corporations with the legitimacy that they are lacking because they are misusing mainly the UN logo and all the UN agencies. So this is a very problematic development that we are facing, particularly now with the Summit of the Future, the plans of the Secretary General to reform the UN. So let me conclude by saying that I believe that the myriad of struggles on the ground, from movements like Black Lives by feminist movements, migrant movements, workers' movements, are showing really the way how to reclaim human rights. And it is very encouraging to see that human rights play a fundamental role in organizing these movements. So I think we have a movement which is very vibrant and alive, but it is going new ways, and we need to go these new ways. I think that, as I said, I want to reiterate that these visions need to be enriched with the non-European cosmovisions, the normative and legal thinking, so that we can integrate human rights and environmental and climate law. For instance, this is one very important field in order to overcome ecological destruction. Likewise, I think human rights should be at the forefront of reshaping financial capitalism and its destructive economic model, and they can help guiding processes of transition towards more sustainable ways of production, distribution, and consumption, but also towards the necessary protection of support for care work. Finally, there is an urgent need for innovation in human rights institutions and practices, and this goes from securing funding for independent work and combating corporate capture, addressing the colonial legacy still present in international and human rights architecture, rebalancing local, national, sub-regional, regional, and international dimensions of human rights work, overcoming fragmentation and lack of institutional coherence with human rights, and finding ways to address the dilemmas of a state-centric human rights accountability and governance, which do not fall into the traps of multi-stakeholderism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sofia. Human rights architecture and the human rights framework is often criticized by a number of progressives and as being sort of apolitical or depoliticized and devoid of politics. But your remarks have shown the complete opposite, that politics very much are at the center of rights, especially when we look at the economic and financial forces that are using human rights as a way to justify their own concentration of power. Now we move on to Gianni Tognoni. Please, Gianni, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks for this opportunity. I think that since the purpose of these meetings is just to prepare some material for long-term work on the topics which have been already mentioned in the concept paper and the previous presentation, my points will be simply some really working notes for something to be done for the future. And in order to do that, I have simply to just summarize briefly the significance of the presence of the Permanent People Tribunal in this session, because I think that the origin, the statutes, and then the activity of the tribunal could be informative on the challenges which were very, very effectively underlined in the previous speech. The Permanent People Tribunal was born in a time where nobody, more or less, was afraid of a systematic violation of human and people rights, because in the 70s, we were still in the era where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was considered to be a chart for the future. We were in a time after the colonization, and everybody was looking forward. The liberation movement in Vietnam had won a big war, and people were thinking really that there was a future that was consistent with the promises of the Universal Declaration. The tribunal is born out of the reality of those years, which was contradictory with this optimistic view. Latin America was part of regional dictatorships born out of an alliance between military and economic power. And the international community was not reacting effectively against that transformation of a full continent in a dictatorship. Everybody was criticizing, more or less, Chile or something like that, but nobody was really taking measure against that because of the application of principle of ingerence in the affairs, which is obviously an important point. What was the challenge of the Universal Declaration of Algiers, which has been mentioned before? We will say that if peoples are considered as they were and as they are in the international law, not subjects of rights, but simply objects of the right guaranteed by states, people are practically disappearing from the role of political actors and those who are taking decisions. The peoples of Latin America were just outside any influence of the international community and of United Nations. And at the same time, the economic development was clearly showing that with the World Bank, the IMF, people were considered to be subjects of their fundamental rights only if they were able to comply with the recepts which were dictated by IMF and the World Bank. The Permanent People Tribunal was established just to show that if the international law is not rewritten and especially not reformulated as something which has their subjects in the peoples who are real, not simply who are represented by government, government will certainly obey more to their interest and not to the interest of people. Along this year, the tribunal had 50 hearings, which means that the full history of these 50 years after the establishment, it was clear that everywhere in the world, there was a fracture, a big distance between the international law and international organization and the respects of real human rights, which were inseparable from the people's right. The chapter of human rights has become a separate chapter from the political evolution of the society. Human rights as a kind of separate chapter, only respect for individual rights. Where you are going to people's rights disappear, because the peoples are in fact considered to be a dependent variable from the will, powers of states, national and international. And in fact, all over, I have not to repeat here, the sentence of the tribunal are available. So based on that, we are facing today the full development of what was appearing at that time a big threat. Today, international law is in fact a guarantor of neo-colonial powers. And there is no space, neither on international court, for people's rights. And in this sense, we could say, it was said before, financial capitalism is the systematic violation of human rights, even if they declare they are respecting human rights, because that is the responsibility of states. But since states are fully dependent on financial capitalism and United Nations are powerless against the property rights, there the human rights do not have any right of citizenship in international debate, except for recommendation, declaration, condemnation. So my points, and I'm sorry for the brevity of that, but I think that the paper by Sofia will help on that. That the challenge is really to imagine from the point of view of civil society, all of us who are here looking forward for a different future, that the challenge will be just to certainly to maintain the full commitment to defend, and that is a really endless war of defense or endless resistance for violation of human rights. But what Sofia was saying about the conceptual challenge is much more urgent today. We have to imagine a rather long-term commitment, not something which could be changed now, because everybody is committed to short-term commitment, because it's difficult to maintain long-term commitments, and especially it is difficult to maintain a really transversal commitment across all bodies who are defending human and people rights. The mention of nature rights is just one model, which is very difficult because nature, the genocide, the ecocide, is more a battle of terms than an alliance among those who are, in fact, all of them are people who are working against the violation, but without having the tools for defending that. If we see what could international law do today against financial capitalism, nothing except support financial capitalism. What could be done for pandemic? Nothing except support international or multinational pharmaceutical society against all the evidence of the violation of people and human rights. So I think that it would be important to imagine, and that is at least now our commitment as a small group, the Permanent Peer Tribunal as a big name, a very small organization. We are depending on the people who have requested along the years our intervention to help the struggle, to join always a very, very strong consciousness of their identity as subjects of law, because if the people, and that is the situation for democracies, because all democracies are in crisis, going from Italy officially, but then from the States, everybody is in fact diagnosing a crisis of democracies. And if democracies are in crisis, it means that they are not complying or responding to the respect of human and people rights. And the challenges, I think that would be just a big coordination in order to really take some, not simply general condemnation of what is done, because it's so evident. Just to say that we have to, in a situation where it is impossible in international law, more or less, except for the phone calls recently between Xi and Zelensky, to pronounce the name of peace as a fundamental right, which is people and human rights, and to declare war as a crime, full stop, not simply for invasion, because we have so many wars. And there is a war, which is an economic war, which is really something which should be in front. And just to take, and I conclude, I think, some specific problems which could be examples, not to exhaust, just the opposite. The example of what we should really invest in order to create a new category and new alliances for supporting human and people rights together, including obviously nature. If I agree with Sofia that nature cannot be separated, but nobody is separating in real life because the nature is violated structurally by the model of development, extractivism, which is promoted and not forbidden. In that sense, is the violation of nature by definition. And in that sense, we have really to create different way of putting together this development. And the cases I think would be important could be Certainly one which has been and is a priority for the tribunal. We had many sessions on that, the migrants. I think that, for instance, for migrants, I think would be an important point to say that migrants, all migrants transversally, must be considered in a global world a people with the right of a people. All migrants, without any distinction, all migrants for the different wars are one people, and that should be something which should be legislated internationally or regionally, depending on the, but, and I say that for Europe, because here we are Europe and Asia. Europe is in fact discussing endlessly on migrants, but migrants are not in the agenda of the model of development of Europe. Politically, they do not exist. They are part of economic problem. So they do not exist, in fact, because the economy is looking for other priorities. So to recreate, we had recently the discussion about whether we have to qualify migrants as migranticide or something like that. That's not the problem. We have really to create nationally and regionally category for how to recognize really migrants as citizens of a global world. And if we create this imagination, is then more easy, no, it's not easy. It's more possible to create a struggle of resistance, which is propositive of a new category. The other area I think which is important would be to look for a clear connection between health and environment. The two chapters are now very separated. We are now looking for a situation which could be used for the people's rights movement, but health has become officially not a human right. The human right language is more or less forbidden. The right to health is a lack of accessibility. The pandemic has been clearly showing that. If you don't have money, you are lost. And nobody's protesting, just the opposite. And patents are not, for instance, Europe is one of the big defenders of that. And that sense is the same for the multinational. So the health environment all together in order to do that. The third point, which I think would be important, is a problem which has to do with work. The tribunal has been involved in a important...
Sorry, Gianni, I will have to ask you to wrap up. Apologies, I'm sorry.
The working on the living salaries, living wages, I think that the working conditions are today back to the slave era for migrants and for many, many, many people. Now, that is something which must be a priority for human rights, because without a living wage or support, human rights are just fake news. And in that sense, if we really avoid or we contribute to call wars, all the wars against nature, and not only the wars between which are dramatic, tragic, Sudan, Ukraine, something like that, I think that the war has become the leading really word and criteria of international order. Sorry for the length, possibly. I thank for the patience.
Thank you, Gianni, and my apologies that because we have a short time. I don't know if we have time for a few quick questions now. Maybe Andy, what do you think? Gianni, any clarificatory questions to Sofia or Gianni? Or shall we go straight to the other panelists and have an open discussion?
We're already more than halfway through, and we've still got 5 wonderful speakers.
Yeah, so let's go.
So it's a bit of a challenge. I know that Gianni sadly has to leave us in a few minutes. But I think maybe we should proceed to the next section. I'm
We
also
could-
conscious that in the attendance, the people attending, we're over 60 people,
Yes.
including our 20 panelists. We have people with decades of experience and struggles.
Right. Yes.
So
Okay.
I think maybe we should proceed, if that's okay, with respect
Yes,
to
yes.
Gianni and Sofia.
Just a quick thing is that there are questions in the Q&A. So both Sofia and Gianni can see them. And do please respond to the the questions that are there in the chat already. And in the meantime, yes, Andy, please go ahead. Over to you for section 2.
Okay, thank you very much, Shalmali. Thank you so much, Sofia and Gianni. And the scene has been set very, very wonderfully. So we have a number of challenges in our lives, and we have a special challenge now that we have. I've seen in the attendance, we have over 60 people, and plus the 20 people who are participating, over 80 people. But in the names there are many people with lifetimes of struggle and exploring ways or innovative ways of promoting and extending and enabling human rights in different ways. So we want to give some voice and opportunity to people at the after our next 5 speakers. I also in the Q&A, everyone has got experience here. So if people want to engage with answering or sharing their experiences there, that will be really appreciated. Okay, my name is Andy Rutherford. I've been a member of the Asia Europe People's Forum since we began in 1996. And I've got the privilege of being part of the working group on participatory democracy, human rights, and refugee and migrant people's rights, which is a lot we're involved with there. We have in this section, we're wanting to focus on, as Sofia was sharing, we have a myriad of struggles and myriad of responses. So we want to look at the different campaigns and struggles that people have been taking forward. And we've brought this down to 5 contributors from really important areas. We are limited by time. And so I will be asking each of you to try and condense to what you say to 5 minutes, and I'll be maybe going to 6, but we need to give space for other people. So I appreciate the challenge of that, but this is our local form of democracy here, if that's okay. I'll be calling on, just so you're aware, I'll be calling on first Rose Trajano, then I'll be asking Khadija Najlaoui to speak, then Bhalchandra Kango, Bernice Cononacion, and lastly, Paula Goia. So just the order that we'll be asking you to speak so you can be prepared. So without further ado, and with great pleasure, I would like to welcome Rose Trajano, who also has had a lifetime of involvement in these areas. She's currently the International Advocacy Officer and a steering committee member of the very, very important iDefend movement in the Philippines, grassroots movement of more than 70 organizations in the Philippines and abroad, very important addition, that defends the rights and upholds the dignity of all Filipinos. And also from 2010 to 2021, she was the Secretary General of PARA, the Philippines Alliance of Human Rights Advocates, which is an alliance of individuals, institutions, organizations committed to the promotion, protection, and realization of human rights in the Philippines. Rose has also served from 2013 to 2019 as the Vice President of the International Federation of Human Rights, or FIDH, an international human rights NGO federating 188 organizations from 116 countries. Rose, it's our great pleasure to invite you to share your thoughts and reflections, please.
Thank you very much, Andy. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, may I ask my one slide to be shared, if okay? Okay.
Here we go.
Okay. Now I have a problem. I cannot see my paper.
Okay.
Okay. Just a minute. I have to Oh my golly. How do I, just a minute. Sorry. Well, anyway, I am tasked to discuss on lawfare, no? And I'm sure that every one of us, no, in all our countries, in all our struggles, all of us actually understood what lawfare means, no? And this is actually legislations and institutions that are used to against opponents, no, or against democratic institutions, CSOs and HRDs, especially by repressive regimes. I would like to discuss some of our major legislations and policies in the Philippines, which affected or impacted our work, no, as human rights defenders and CSOs in the Philippines. And some of them, at least 10 of them are here. No? We have the anti-money laundering law. While I'm discussing some of the legislations, I would also like to, of course, provide some examples. No? I'm still at a loss because I cannot find my notes. I do not know how to,
Rose, if you go
okay.
to gallery on the
yes, I can see it. I can see it now. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Let me discuss some of the major legislations and policies that directly impacted our human rights work in the Philippines. Majority were enacted and or issued during the time of the Duterte presidency, who really did everything in his power, or actually even beyond his power, to shrink civic space and attack CSOs and human rights defenders. As I discuss the laws and policies, I will also provide some examples of its impact on HRDs in the Philippines. At the end, I will discuss the actions that we took. The anti-money laundering law, I'm sure all countries have this, no, in their legislations. When I was still Secretary General of PARA, I think it was 2019, our bank threatened to close our account if we cannot furnish them with updated financial documents in 5 days, no? That was without notice. We were just surprised. But of course, we really have to comply. No? And last year, the bank account of the Rural Missionaries of the Philippines, a religious order who had been operating in the country for more than 5 decades, were frozen as they are accused of being a terrorist organization. We also have the Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012. Many of our colleagues, especially from the environment sector, were charged with cyber libel charges as they talk and or issue statements online against mining companies who had been ravaging our countrysides. Unfortunately, at this time, it's a crime to say the truth. No? The law was also used in one or some of the charges lodged against Maria Ressa, our Nobel Peace Prize laureate awardee. In December 2018, Executive Order number 70. So this is not a law, no? Just an order by the president creating the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. It is a very powerful institution headed by the Philippine himself, by the president himself. It's an all-of-government approach to quell the Communist Party and their armed groups, the New People's Army. They regularly conduct orientation and enumerate legitimate organizations as supporting communist or terrorist groups. There are some examples like a labor group in Coca-Cola, Philippines, in the Visayas Islands were accused as communists and terrorists. iDefend members in Mindanao, our southern island, were personally invited by men in uniform, military men in uniform, to join an orientation of the NTF-LCAC. They were asked to sign document renouncing membership with the Communist Party and even membership from iDefend. In October 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission, according to them, in abeyance with the Financial Action Task Force, issued a guidelines where all nonprofit organizations have to submit detailed profiles, including areas where we operate, who are our beneficiaries, and all funding partners. The profile will be their basis for assessment if the NGO or the NPO is on low, medium, or high risk of being used by terrorist organizations. And these forms, this profile can be shared with the security sector anytime. The Department of Interior and Local Government issued several memoranda, including engagement of CSOs and international agencies to prevent violent extremism. And all projects, especially in Mindanao, are vetted, cleared, and approved by the Department of Interior and Local Government. These include projects that are implemented by INGOs. So all projects that aim to educate, do trainings or development work in the grassroots, especially in Moro communities, can be suspect as projects that will encourage violent extremism. Another guideline is for the implementation of EO70 is essentially surveillance and reporting activities at all geographic levels, including our smallest unit, the barangay or the village. So we were cautioned by one of our friendly leaders there that we should be cautious in doing documentation and providing assistance to victims of war on drugs, as they were asked to write down and submit our names to higher authorities. The Anti-Terror Act, of course, was enacted during the height of COVID lockdown in the Philippines. Very good timing because CSOs, HRDs have limited mobilizations during the time. The act created the Anti-Terror Council who can proscribe terrorist individuals and or groups. They already proscribe at least 20 organizations and some individuals, allegedly leaders of Communist Party. And then in February 5, 2021, the Department of Foreign Affairs ordered the embassies that funds to NGOs should be cleared with them first before providing to the NGOs. Fortunately, the embassies have discussed among themselves and did not abide by the order. The embassies are aware of the rationale of the government for this note. And then on January 28, for NGOs or CSOs who would like to be accredited by the local government should need clearance from the police and military and should do regular reporting. But this provision was eventually rescinded when we held dialogues with the government and protested against the provisions. And then finally, the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples resolution forbids the use of term lumad as reference to indigenous people. Although this is only a resolution without corresponding penalty, still in effect a statement of intimidation and harassment against indigenous peoples. According to the NCIP, the lumad term is associated with the Communist Party. So there is always an interchangeable term of communist and terrorist in the Philippines. What I mentioned were major legislation policies against HRDs, but even penal code crimes were also used against legitimate dissenters and opponents of administration, such as Senator Laila de Lima. The Dangerous Drugs Act were used against her, and she has been in prison for 5 years. But this trump-up case was filed after she started the investigation on extrajudicial killings. We currently have SLAP suits, or the strategic litigation against public participation. There were 9 farmers who are now have a warrant of arrest. 8 women, 4 of them were senior citizens, and had been fighting for the land since 2012. And their case is syndicated staffa, a non-bailable crime. Despite the very challenging political and human rights environment during the Duterte regime, our human rights defenders were not deterred by the suppression and violations we encountered. Of course, not to mention the pandemic restrictions. Many have been killed, disappeared, arbitrarily arrested, but we resisted in all forms and platforms available during those times. The first thing we did is to expand and broaden the human rights movement in the Philippines, which now include multi-sector. Thus, we formed In Defense of Human Rights and Dignity movement in 2016, 7 days after Duterte came to power. Then we strengthened our capacities on digital campaigning and was the first group that used live streaming 2 weeks after complete lockdown due to the pandemic. We are online every week discussing the continuous killing, COVID militarization, and attacks to HRDs, especially during the time the anti-terror bill was being fast-tracked in Congress. Despite restrictions in mobility, cautiously we still went out the street to protest the Anti-Terror Act. Different members filed at least 3 separate petitions with the Supreme Court, but we have a total of 37 petitions against the act. We took all opportunities to attend online and offline seminars with the security sector and government agencies to raise issues against attacks on HRDs and civic space. We issued numerous statements on critical issues that affect advocacies of HRDs and concerns of people. We initiated dialogue with the Securities and Exchange Commission and sought help with the Commission on Human Rights. We intensified education and organizing work and conducted numerous street marches. We also again lobbied for the enactment of the Human Rights Defenders Protection Bill. Hopefully we will have it. No? It has been in the House of Representatives and it may pass anytime. This protection bill will be our main armor against attacks to HRDs and shrinking space. We also maximize the use of international conventions and platforms like the Human Rights Council, the European Union, Parliament, the International Criminal Court for repressive and oppressive judicial system we have in the Philippines. We were also in close contact with friendly diplomatic embassies and provided numerous briefings to them. I don't know if I already mentioned all, maybe not, but the critical important action we took is to further strengthen our digital, physical security protocols and address psychosocial health of human rights defenders.
1 more minute, please, Rose.
Yeah, with our new administration attacks against HRDs continue, but not as much as we have during the past government. The lull or less incidences of civil and political violations remains to be seen if it will continue. The issue and economic, social, and cultural rights are the major challenges we are now facing. Not to say that we do not have it before, but we are feeling it more now. Food insecurity due to development aggression, learning poverty, energy source insecurity, lack of jobs could be the social volcano that may erupt. And then we will have new sets of legislations and policies that will quell resistance by the people. By then, we should again be ready and help build a human rights-based economy for all. Salamat po. Thank you, Andy.
Salamat po. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a great privilege, Rose, and highlighting this fundamental shift in perceptions from the state being the protector and enforcer of human rights, in theory, to being the promoter of, as you have summarized, lawfare, systematic, consistent, and deep levels of oppression of human rights, perpetuated and enforced in the laws of the land. And therefore, and as you have shared, Rose, and thank you so much to everyone involved in the networks you're part of, the systematic responses that you have taken forward, both at local, national, and international levels. But what iDefend and you are taking forward as an example to all of us, because actually lawfare is happening in every single country at present. Yeah, Philippines is an extreme end of it. We know that, and so our solidarity and respect for you is only strengthened through your presentation. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call on Khadija Najlaoui, who is joining us from London. Good day, Khadija.
Hi, everyone.
Khadija is representing Transnational Migrant Platform and is a member of the coordination of Waling-Waling, the rights for all migrant workers. She works with Unite the Union, which is based in the UK, one of the most important trade unions in the UK. Transnational Migrant Platform was set up in 2008, a convergence and alliance of several migrant communities in the global south, across Africa, Asia, Latin America, Morocco and Turkey, as well as European and international organizations involved in solidarity, anti-racist and global justice work. Khadija, through the Waling-Waling, was a leading member of the FIAN campaign, which campaigned for 10 years for the rights of undocumented peoples and won their rights as migrant domestic workers and recognition for their rights as workers. Waling-Waling has participated in the preparation and holding of the, as Gianni shared with us, Permanent People's Tribunal session in London, is now a member of the Status Now network campaigning for the regularization of all migrants and refugees. Wow. and you're here today as well. Thank you, Khadija.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate your presence. Please share as you can within 5 to 7 minutes, if possible.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to share with you a bit from my personal life. I'm Khadija Najlaoui, originally from Morocco, and I am participating in this webinar to represent the Transnational Migrant Platform Europe. This is a network where organizations of migrants and refugees come together from different countries, come together to campaign for our rights. My organization in London is the Waling-Waling-Rights for all migrant workers. And I am a trade unionist and now work with United Union. I want to share our campaign for undocumented migrants and refugees. After working in the garment factory in Morocco, I spent 4 years as a migrant in Dubai, where I discovered that my wages were even lower than what I have earned as a factory worker in Morocco. In 2007, my employer brought me to London. Lucky me, I had rights. I joined Unite at the right time, then as a domestic worker. Thanks to the 10 years long campaign organized by Waling-Waling, FIAN, and other organizations, especially the TNGWU Union, now Unite. That campaign was won in 1997-98, recognizing domestic work in a private household as work. That campaign recognizing domestic work, private household, and the future workers accompanying their employer to the UK were given a domestic work visa. However, in 2012, the domestic work visa was abolished. In 2017, I joined the re-established Waling-Waling to campaign to restore the rights lost in 2012. It was in this campaign that I learned about the UN Convention for the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and members of their families. It was this convention which gave us the confidence as undocumented workers to organize ourselves and to campaign for our rights as workers, as migrants and women, insisting that no human person is illegal. But as we all know, one of the major problems with the consideration and human rights of migrants and refugees is that the government roll back these rights according to the political will. One example we have in the UK, it's that the government has until now refused to sign the ILO Convention 189, recognizing the rights of domestic workers. In Waling-Waling, we are again in the process of a new campaign to restore those basic workers' rights. From this campaign, we have participated in the preparation and process of the Permanent People Tribunal in London in 2018, which contributed to making visible the extremely racist and hostile environment in the UK, which has an almost total exclusion of migrants and refugees. We are participating in the UK-wide Status Now for All campaign, as well as the development of the European regularization campaign together with the Transnational Migrant Platform Europe. Despite Brexit, we know human rights have no borders, and it is a transnational solidarity which will generate the pressure for lasting change. We invite you to sign on the pact of solidarity, which is our alternative to the hostile environment in the rollback of human rights. This pact is built on the conviction that it is not a crime to migrate or seek refuge. It is human rights. Rights for all migrant workers and refugees must be gained. So please, I urge everyone to sign on the Pact of Solidarity. Thank you so much.
Khadija, thank you so much. That was an inspiring sharing of your life and your struggles on so many different levels, but how they've evolved, and a great example to us of how it is vital to work in collaboration through struggles through the different organizations. And also the fact that criminally, I will say, in the United Kingdom, rights can be won, fought for struggles, and then taken away. And so, unfortunately, the struggle does continue. Thank you so much. Thank you so much indeed.
I hope everyone will, the message is there, and we always want to link with other organizations to find the solution, because we can see that a lot of migrant domestic workers and refugees are struggling in silence, which is like there is no rights to access.
Exactly.
And we really want them to be visible to access the rights as any other workers in the UK.
Exactly. And I think FIAN and then Waling-Waling and the Trans-Migrant Platform are bringing people together who have sometimes felt invisible and excluded. So it's so important. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, next, I'd very much like to welcome Bhalchandra Kango from India. Welcome, Bhalchandra. And also you are of a life of involvement in trade union work with the All India Trade Unions Congress, which you joined as a student activist, not to date you, in 1975. So when I say a lifetime of struggle, it's very clear. And you've been active in the trade union movement in India in many different levels over your life. So please, you have 5 minutes to share some of your key thoughts and reflections.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly, thank you very much. No, I can't hear you now. You were perfect, and then you pressed the... Bhalchandra, you switched your mic off. Could you switch it on again, please? Yes, now that's good. Perfect.
As a trade unionist, I firmly believe that labor rights and human rights have evolved in an international situation because of the constant struggle of the people, whether it is farmers, whether it is tribals, whether it is workers. They have all fought for whatever concepts of human rights, rights that we have. So struggles are a must if we want to progress. Therefore, as a trade unionist, I have learned that this is an area where workers have to come together and fight for their rights. Then only their rights and human rights could be protected. My experience today in my country is, and what I read about other countries also, recently, I read just about Philippines also, the same thing are happening everywhere. Our main problem today is we are living in the world of contradictions and in the world of economic crisis. The new technology is taking away jobs, old jobs are dying very fast, and new jobs are not created so fast. So there is a mismatch between the expectations of the people, and unemployment is increasing, the cost of living is increasing, and there is unrest amongst people. At the same time, the new economic policy, the new world is insisting on profit motivation by the corporations, where they feel that the labor should be made to work as they want. And therefore, in my country, the labor laws are getting dismantled. Whatever we achieved in last 75 years of democracy and struggle, the labor laws are being changed by the government, which claims to be a majority government. And that is the main crisis. The majority is not aware about the problems of minorities. On the contrary, diversity is considered to be a threat. And therefore, anyone who has a different eating habits, different thinking process is considered to be a threat. And nationalism, religious hatred, and everything is being used to create problems, and the laws are created in such a manner that whoever the ruling class feels is threatening them will be put behind the bars under certain pretexts, like by passing certain laws like anti-terror acts or anti-money laundering act. All the institutions which had existed previously are being used to threaten the people, and particularly the activists who are trying to expose the different aspects of the repressive government and repressive regime. So this is a major problem that we are facing today. But at the same time, workers are coming together, all the trade unions of different hues are coming together and joining hands to oppose these tactics of the repressive regime. At the same time, let me be very clear that previously we used to, the civil society and the labor unions were at loggerheads. Many of the labor unions feel that civil society activists are creating confusion amongst the labor, and the civil society people feel that labor is focused only on economic issues and other issues are being neglected. But now both of them are coming together because the civil society is under severe attack. As in Philippines, we have seen the same kind of things are happening in my country, where only rightist and religious organizations are allowed to take foreign money and rest of them are banned, and creating and lot of hurdles are created for them. Legal hurdles, economic hurdles are created by asking them to take permissions from the police, from the government, and which is very difficult to obtain. And therefore, civil society and the trade unionists and the farmers organization all coming together. Recently, we had 11-month long agitation by farmers, which compelled government to withdraw 3 laws which they had passed in the parliament, which were anti-farmers laws and which were to assist the big corporations to take away farmlands and farm business. This was opposed by the farmers, and 11 months around the capital, thousands of farmers sat on the roads for 11 months and government was compelled to withdraw the laws. So farmers and workers are coming together. The labor laws have been changed in the parliament without discussions with the trade unions because of the brute majority that the ruling party has. The ruling party has passed 4 labor codes which destroys the existing labor laws and labor protection that was given. 91% of the labor, Indian labor, is still unorganized and do not have social security. The government is not thinking of giving them any social security. Even rights like pensions and health, everything is not given. Strange conflicts are emerging. Recently, a state government had passed a law giving health as a right to the people. And very surprisingly, the medical professionals went on strike against that law because they feel that their rights are being encroached. So these kind of things are happening. Health as a right, education as a right. These are fundamental rights which needs to be protected. But unfortunately, when you put profit before people, these kinds of contradictions emerge. And therefore, I feel that in today's situation, we are having a contradiction where economic integration of the world is taking place, financial integration is taking place, but the nationalist regime are dividing people on different grounds and creating issues before us. And therefore, I feel that the march of the people, which was very clear during 1948 when the Human Rights Declaration was passed, the people had an experience of Second World War in which more than 6 crore people were killed, and people had an experience of labor rights getting associated with the human rights. All these experiences thought were very, very assuring, and everybody thought, we as a student leader felt that world is, somebody mentioned about Vietnam War, the defeat of the big country in Vietnam War created an impression that yes, the people are marching ahead. But everything has changed after 1980. And we are now again having a repressive regimes in most of the countries where people and labor rights and human rights, civil societies, right, activists are all under stress. And therefore, we have to understand the international scenario as well as the economic situation. Recently, somebody mentioned about the war. Yes, war is a crime, and human civilization should be very particular that war should not, anyone who encourages war should be considered as a criminal as far as the human rights are concerned. Peace is a must for development and for development of human rights. And therefore, as a trade unionist, we in India, we work for peace and solidarity of the people and are trying to oppose the repressive measures passed by the government to curb the labor rights, farmer rights, and even social activists are being imprisoned. We are fighting against that. Let me be very clear that this fight is a prolonged fight. It is not an easy fight, but we as trade unionists are very conscious about it, that unless we come together and fight, we will not be able to change the order. We are for people before profit. We are not against profit, but profit should be for the people, not over the people, is the slogan with which we are working. Perfect. So let us, I'd like to conclude here by saying that the change in economic policy, a proper understanding of international situation, and a pressure on United Nations to play a more active role in preventing the anti-human right activism by the repressive states is needed. How to do it, we'll have to come together and decide.
Of course. Perfect. Kango, thank you so much indeed for your wise reflections, and also highlighting that, as in the Philippines, tragically, India is a country where lawfare is being practiced on the people by the state in a systematic way with increasing vigor. But also over the last years, the increasing importance of collaborations across communities, across different sectors, to promote more just, equal, and inclusive India. The struggle continues very, very much indeed. Thank you so much for your contribution. It's greatly appreciated. If you could close your microphone, Kango, and also your video, that would be fantastic. But you'll still be there to participate later on. Thank you. Next, I'd very much like to welcome Nis Cononacion from the Philippines, and as currently Deputy General Secretary of the inspiring trade union movement, SENTRO, which is in English, the Centre for United and Progressive Labour, committed to social movement trade unionism. Double underlined, very important. Also, SENTRO is an active member of the World March of Women, with many Filipinas amongst of Filipinas, among other coalitions. And also, you've been actively involved in development of trade unions as a form of organizing domestic workers and care workers in several countries in Asia and the Middle East. It's a warm pleasure to have you with us today, Nis. Please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Andy. Good afternoon, sisters and brothers. Let me share to you SENTRO's work in relation to our migrant care workers organizing in our take on migration. I hope everyone's still there, and we really hope that we can contribute in the discussion. For us, the rights and welfare of migrant workers is an important area of concern for the Philippines. Being one of the largest labor quote-unquote exporters, migrant labor is an integral part of the country's economic development. With millions of Filipinos working as overseas Filipino workers across the globe, many are unfortunately affected by the lack or absence of labor rights protection in the destination countries. This is especially the case for Filipino migrant domestic workers. The tragic case of Julie B. Renara, for example, highlights the vulnerability faced by many domestic workers deployed in various destination countries, often deprived of adequate protection by existing labor laws and subject to widespread discrimination both at home and in foreign soil. Migrant domestic workers are among the most exploited of the global working class today. Ensuring their protection by supporting their own efforts to self-organize is therefore one of the most pressing responsibilities of the international workers' movement. In the spirit of internationalism, as well as the practical fact that many migrant workers today are from the Philippines, SENTRO, our union, has been active in the organizing efforts of Filipino migrant domestic workers. Just last year, we managed to organize, after decades of work, the first ever transnational union of Filipino domestic and care workers, aptly named the Pinay Care Workers Transnational. And most of our leaders from Pinay are also here with us. This union brought together migrant domestic workers union from Bahrain, Hong Kong, Jordan, Kuwait, Macau, Malaysia, Taiwan, and even the domestic workers here in the Philippines. It was a new milestone in the long and incessant struggle of Filipino migrant workers to better their lives by organizing themselves. Following the footsteps of Filipino migrant workers who struggled against oppression and racism in Hawaii and the mainland USA in the 1930s to the 50s, and those of Larry Ityong and the Manongs of Delano, who founded the Filipino Farm Labor Union in Stockton that led the iconic strike of fruit pickers in the 1960s. Pinay was founded as a transnational union of Filipino care workers in the Philippines and abroad last December 16 and 17 of 2022. This is a culmination of 17 years of hard work to organize Filipino migrant domestic and care workers. It started in 2003 when a very good friend of the Asian Migrant Center met with Alliance for Progressive Labor, the forerunner of SENTRO back then, in a cafe in Tomas Morato here in Quezon City to discuss the possibility of joining forces to organize Filipino migrant domestic workers. At that time, no union dared to organize migrant workers, no union here from our country in the Philippines. As such, the decision of the APL leadership, now SENTRO, to send an organizer to Hong Kong using our own resources was a very bold decision. It was based on the idea that as a social movement union, it is imperative for APL, for SENTRO, to organize migrant workers as they are potential source of autonomous working class power, one that's not dependent on the machinations of the local politicians. The past two national elections proved this theory right. Migrant workers can have a powerful labor vote. Unfortunately, not yet for progressive politics. In 2004, APL sent an organizer to Hong Kong, and a few years later, another one joined in Hong Kong. This was to support of our solidarity partner, Eleanor Way. Our learning curve was really long. We organized APL Hong Kong in 2005. We almost gave up, but this eventually evolved in Progressive Labor Union of Domestic Workers in Hong Kong in 2012, and I'm very happy that they are also here. The organizing was also based on a strategic vision to unionize per nationality. So that's PLU, then the Thai migrant workers, the Nepalese domestic workers, and other nationalities. So they form multinationality federation in the destination country, which is now called Federation of Asian Domestic Workers Union in Hong Kong, and eventually transnationalize the Filipino care workers. Thus, from Hong Kong, we started spreading out to Malaysia in 2014, in Macau in 2016, and in Singapore in 2017. Then through the International Domestic Workers Federation, We met Domestic Caretakers Union in Taiwan in 2018, and later through the IDWF and ELO Norway conferences, we managed to meet Sandigan Kuwait in 2019. Meanwhile, at the home front, the campaign for the ratification of Convention 189 in 2009 to 2011, where we played a pivotal role in unifying the various efforts of NGOs, trade unions, and other stakeholders, proved to be instrumental not only in ratifying the convention, but also in organizing domestic workers in the Philippines as a union. Labor Education and Research Network started organizing domestic workers in 2012, which eventually led to the establishment of United Domestic Workers of the Philippines in 2015. United remains to be the biggest union of domestic workers in our country. While the idea of building a transnational union was first discussed as early as 2010, its realization was given boost by our different solidarity partners from SENTRO, LEARN, IDWF, DGBBW. SENTRO is very thankful for all our partners who really stood for us years to make this, to make the moment possible in having Pinay Care Workers Transnational. And given the continued growth of the global economy and its vast web of interlinkages tying nations together, it is vital that the migrant workers, which makes globalization possible, are protected throughout the entire labor process, from hiring to deployment in the destination countries. Accomplishing this requires a strong and unionized migrant workforce that is embedded or closely connected to the trade unions in the countries where they work. In this context, SENTRO's migration work is only the beginning of bigger strides in the organization of domestic OFWs in all countries where Filipino workers can be found. While SENTRO has made significant advances in organizing migrant domestic workers, many issues remain. In spite of many important victories in the past few years, such as the filing and resolution of cases related to violation of migrant workers' rights, as well as policy improvements, there have also been many defeats. Reflecting on these losses, one such sore area is the defeat in the 2022 national elections, where the overwhelming number of migrant workers voted for the Marcos Duterte alliance. There is a need to revitalize the internal consolidation of the union by fast-tracking the development of well-rounded union leaders across all levels of the organization, including migration work. For SENTRO, the present conjuncture, both externally and internally, necessitates the further development of our strategy, social movement unionism. The building of unions must be seen as a foundational to and intrinsically linked to workers' political participation, together with our political parties, empowerment through developmental means such as cooperatives and other forms of economic democracy, and as well as cultural transformation within and beyond workers' organizations. With more politically aware and organizationally effective leaders, for example, SENTRO can sustain its effort in strengthening the power of organized labor, as well as continue contributing to building political unity among the trade unions. Through this initiative,
you're finishing? Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Through these initiatives, the Philippine workers' movement will be in better place to assert its interests at home while linking migrant Filipino struggles with the trade unions and progressive movements in the destination countries. And a pact of solidarity is also a tool forward. Thank you very much.
Denise, thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant listening to you, but also for you sharing the decades of struggle and collaboration across countries, and especially for women migrant workers, both Filipinos and others in different parts of Asia and also within the Philippines itself. And the creation of Pinay Workers Transnational Union is an absolute major achievement. Thank you, and testimony to all your struggles. Many thanks indeed. Last but by absolutely no means least, welcome again, Paula. Good to see you again. Paula Goia is a peasant farmer and beekeeper in the farming community in Germany and a member of the German peasant organization, ABL. Paula was also a member of the coordination committee of the wonderful European coordination of Via Campesina. As we know from previous Asia Europe People's Forum meetings, thank you, an active leader of La Via Campesina. Amongst many things, Paula was involved in the negotiations toward the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People, which was a fundamental achievement for many of the people's movements. Paula, please, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thanks for the APF, and specifically this working group for organizing this, I think, important event, where we come together from different sectors, conducting this intersectional analysis, which I think is extremely important in face of the current context. From La Via Campesina, I would say that we share very much, the analysis that have been presented here, and we also are confronted with very similar experiences, in the territories where our organizations are. So because of time, I know we have to be concise, so I will try to focus my intervention in this very concrete example of the UNDROP, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas, as an example of tool to stand against the current context. But first, I'd like to go back a bit. So where this document, this tool, this instrument comes from. And I think it's very important to be aware that this comes from the very reality, of our members back in the 90s. Especially the ones from Indonesia, that had the vision about the importance of creating a document, an instrument in which our rights are anchored, and because at that time already they realized that the violations, the discriminations, the attacks they were facing were very much against their rights. So, for example, brutal evictions from communal lands, from territories where they have been for generations, living and working, evictions even by police, killings and so on. This is not acceptable. So together with our allies and FIAN and CETIM organizations who have a long history in human rights, helped us quite a lot to understand and to translate, that this violence that we were facing, they are very much human rights violations, and they have to be translated to a language, or they have to be translated also to the rural realities of our communities. So we started this exercise together. And it was actually a very long exercise. First to have this common understanding within the movement, but later on also to address these violations and to bring it to human rights institutions. More specifically the Human Rights Council. And to finally be able to enter a process for the adoption of United Nations Declaration. It was also important throughout the time to have an understanding that the violations we face are not only for peasants themselves or for smallholder farmers, but that there are also other people working in rural areas who are also very much affected or by violations, and that they also belong in this instrument. So when we talk about UNDROP, when we talk about the declaration, the Peasants' Declaration, we are actually meaning also land workers, migrant workers, indigenous peoples, fisher folks, pastoralists, and so on, who are working and living in rural areas. All these groups are part of the scope. And this process was very important for us to understand how much political subjects we are, and that we have rights. No, we are right holders. No, so yeah, so the translation of these rights to the rural reality meant to to define what is the right to land, what are our rights to seeds, the right to water, to forest, the right to clean environments, our right to health, our right to fair incomes, and many others. So it was a long process. The adoption took place 2018, and now we are in a process of implementation. And of course, the implementation is not easy at all. We have some success experiences where UNDROP has already been translated to national laws and so on. But there is also still a long way to go, in terms of disseminating it among the movement itself, but also more broadly. We are working, for example, together with other organizations like FIAN in producing reports of violations we still face. But very important is as well our fight currently to get a special procedure in the United Nations to inform about about peasant rights. And this is something very much current, that we are trying to pass a resolution this year. So the challenges are still ongoing. Because of time, I cannot go into some violations we are facing currently, but as other speakers have already mentioned, we very much resonate with the violations of but in terms of opportunities, to try to conclude quickly, I think UNDROP, this declaration is a powerful tool to denounce the system, the agro-industrial production model, that is a model of death, and producing so many human rights violations, collective rights violations, and many others. UNDROP is also a tool to empower peasants, as political subjects, and it's a tool for us, together with our allies, to demand, that our rights are respected and protected. And then UNDROP is also a tool to present peasants and other people working in rural areas as an alternative, for the present and also for the future. And the second opportunity that I see is that we have been speaking quite a lot about crisis, but we can also see the crisis as such as an opportunity for movements to come stronger together and to organize resistance. And I think this event today, this webinar, is showing how much synergies we can build, from this intersectional perspective that we have here. And in that sense, the food sovereignty movement is leading or is calling for a global process to think about strategies together. When I talk about the food sovereignty movement, I'm talking specifically about the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, the IPC, which is calling for a new process towards towards the Global Millennium Forum to 2025, which is a global forum for food sovereignty, which will take place in India. We know that the struggle for food sovereignty, it is very much, there are quite a lot of overlaps with climate issues, with gender issues, with economic, social justice issues, and therefore it's extremely important that we come together in a global process from these intersectional perspectives to also think together about strategies for systemic transformations. So this is a concrete opportunity that we have, and I think many of the actors here today could and should be part of this process. And for that, please contact us in the IPC. So foodsovereignty.org is the website, because I think this richness is extremely important. And finally, just to conclude, I think for us as a peasant, as long, sowing in this current context is an act of resistance, and as long as we sow, we have hope. Thank you.
Perfect. Paula, I can't thank you enough, both for joining us today and for sharing. You really brought the whole of our session together in your presentation in such an important way. We began with obviously Sofia sharing the 3 core areas that we should, encouraging us to reflect on. And of course, the whole process that you shared in the leading up to UNDROP is a massive, massive process of how to claim human rights beyond states in many ways. And also signposting the collaborations therein is absolute, and the cross-sectoral and interest groups collaborations has been absolutely fundamental. So Paula, thank you so much for sharing your reflections and also the struggles over the previous years and looking forward. So I think it's my turn now to pass back to Shalmali. I will just take one little bit on the way, is to say that in the Q&A, there's been a fantastic exchange there. We're not the people to answer the questions. We're not the oracles or anything like that. It's everyone, as I said earlier on, the attendees. Most people there have got decades of involvement in struggles, resistance, and collaborations. And there's a very vibrant exchange within the Q&A where people are answering and sharing and exchanging ideas. So that richness is really part of what the Asia Europe People's Forum tries to provide a space for. And we hope we will be able to continue to do that. My thanks to the 5 brilliant speakers and contributors. And I now hand back to Shalmali.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We had hoped that we would have at least 20 minutes for an open session, but we have gone definitely over time, way over time already. So I guess my question now, we have interpreters who are still with us, and I hope they can stay with us. But my question is, there's Christina. So, okay, Christina is saying that the interpreters can only stay with us for 10 more minutes. But my question, what I'd like, we don't have time for an open forum, but are there any burning questions or any particular questions to any of our panelists? I can see there is a hand raised by Faisal. So, and then there is Joy. If you could put your questions on, if you could unmute yourself and just speak very briefly in 30 seconds or 1 minute, because we don't have time really for much more than sharing this. Faisal, would you like to? Okay, moving to Joy. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to make it very quick because yes.
Yes, my question is that regarding the business and human rights, how the country can address the corporate or other intervention, especially the private companies, by using the UN business human rights? That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Joy. So the question is about businesses and human rights, how countries can use the business and human rights framework. Faisal, do you have a question?
I've noticed that Faisal's hand has been up since the beginning, so maybe...
I know, I asked him first, but he didn't speak,
okay.
So...
No, but from the very beginning of the session, of the webinar. So maybe it's...
Yeah. Ashok, do you have a question?
Yes. How can we mitigate the situation, particularly for the interstate migrant labor and inter-countries migrant labor?
Okay, so you're asking about the protection of migrant labor both within countries and outside, right?
Yeah,
in other and in other countries.
Yeah. And how can we use that whatever the UN ILO convention and provisions? How can we pressurize to local government sending country also and receiving country also.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? One, Faisal, gone. Okay, in the meantime, why don't I come back to the panelists? Who would like to take the question on the business human rights?
Panelistas, ¿quién quiere contestar a la pregunta
Huh? Oops.
de los derechos humanos?
Sorry, Yumit, we can hear you in the
I think I
general
need to be
room, not
assigned
in
to the
booth.
booth again because I had to come out. I had a technical issue.
Ah, okay. So can you make me host again, and I will do it.
Okay,
not you, Bishnu.
Yeah, Vishnu will do that. In the meantime, Sofia, would you or would anybody else like to pick up the issue of business and human rights?
Hold on, we don't have interpretations. We just need to be assigned to the booth. Sorry.
Right.
Just a second, and then this.
So Rose is offering.
Yeah.
Just a minute, please. We don't have interpretation. Please wait. Please wait a minute. Let Christina do the. Has Christina been made the co-host?
I think it should be fine now. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, so let's take some quick responses from our panelists. Yes, Rose?
Briefly on business and human rights. Of course, we are rooting on the legally binding instrument. No, we think that this really could help corporate capture and transnational corporations accountability. But right now, we are also using the United Nations guidelines on business and human rights. We have created a working group with the Commission on Human Rights, including some progressive corporations and companies. No? And we are now promoting the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. We know that this is, of course, what the European or the Americans would like to instead of the LBI. But these are some of the issues we are doing now. Also, advocacy on the National Action Plan. I think you should also try those advocacy work. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Sofia, would you like to also go on this? Because I know that there has been a critique among many social movements of the business and human rights.
Yes, thank you, Shaila. Thank you for the question. I would say that business and human rights is a narrow framework, a limited one, focusing mainly on due diligence of companies so that they themselves have a system to see whether they are doing all what they are supposed to do, that human rights abuses don't happen. But this is a very narrow framework. This is not really accountability. This is not really having to be responsible for the harm that they cause. So therefore, I would say that I know that there are many countries where already such an opening is of help. We cannot deny that. I think it can be used, and in fact, right now we see also that many of these due diligence are turning into laws. This is what it is happening in Europe right now, right? In Germany, for instance, we have a new law for the global supply chains. So even though this is narrow, I think we have to use it, but we have to be conscious that it is very limited, that this is still working within the economic logic and economic system. And what we want is to overcome this destructive economic system. And therefore, we have to go beyond this very framing. I think the treaty is an important step going beyond, but then we have also to work on regulatory policies that really dismantle corporate power, like, for instance, taxation and regulation of financial flows. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sofia. We also have a question on how to protect the rights of migrants nationally, domestically, and across borders through using the UN systems. Bernice, would you like to speak to that, please?
Yeah,
In relation to some of the few points I can answer is that one, we can also push for bilateral labor agreements between the country of origin and country of destination, as well as push for standard contracts. But at the same time, as trade unions, we should also make sure that we help our migrant workers to be organized as well. But it also means that in the destination countries where they work, they should also have the same rights as the workers in the country of destination. So they should be covered by their labor code, if that's what they call it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernice. Anybody else would like to speak on the issue of protecting workers' rights?
I would like to add.
Yes, comrade, please.
Intrastate migration is a major problem in India, and we have a Migration Act, but then labor unions have to be mobilized to make it more effective. And mobilization of people is the most important thing. We have a lot of people, lot of workers going to Middle East, and government has been compelled to form some certain laws and regulation to protect the interest of those migrant workers. So we have to force the local government, state, national government, as well as ILO and UNO should be motivated through constant pressure from trade unions and civil societies who are working for human rights to consider migrant laborers as human beings. They are not only labor to exploit, but they are also human beings. I remember Ford had once said that how is that I need only 2 hands to work, but I have to employ the whole person. So unless we consider migrant workers as human beings and fight for their rights, the problem of migrant workers will not be solved. But I feel that it's a multi-activities and we have to think out of box. Make our government work to protect the interest of the migrant labor from the country, within the state, as well as compel ILO and United Nations to formulate laws which will be implemented.
Thank you, comrade. Totally agree. Yes, I know we're on time and we've gotten a couple more minutes from the interpreters, but now I'd just like to ask Khadija and Paula, would you like to make any last comments? And in addition to Khadija and Paula, any of our other speakers would like to make any last closing remarks? Khadija?
Yes. Actually, my point is the struggle of domestic and all migrant workers, which needs to be covered. And the link that we linked with the Europe organizations in multicultural and also with the status for all now, it's to make all the undocumented to be regularized, which is a good point. It's a good point because, you know, we can see the struggle. We can see they cannot access the health care. They cannot access any protection. So it's a good point if we have this solution and we keep on with campaigning and joining the other organizations to be together, like doing a big, there is a lots of ways, like there is to campaign, there's a lots of ways, as we did before when we rejoined, we create a booklet which we put a lots of different like issues, different struggle, different bad experiences. So yes, the most point that we focus on and to restore the rights of all migrants and all of them to be visible, have a protection, have rights that any other workers, and also to be all the migrants, undocumented workers and refugees to be regularized. Thank you.
Thank you, Khadija. Okay, Paula, let's hear from you, and then I will give the last word to Amirul, who has put his hand up again. Yes, please.
No, I just want to express that, you know, we are deeply in solidarity with the migrant struggle, from the peasants movement. There are so many migrant workers in the fields, here in Europe, but also elsewhere. And therefore, and and many of them undocumented, many of them, especially women, suffering sexual abuse, and so on. And to make sure that, that the supermarkets of Europe are always fulfilled, with foods that are not seasonal, with food that is, the production is leading to human rights violation, but also to climate disasters. So I think this is one concrete example how much our struggles belong together, and how important it is to conduct this analysis together, but also how important it is to develop common strategies, and therefore just like to repeat my invitation and my call for a global process towards a forum on food sovereignty, but which takes all these different perspectives into account and help us to think together about systemic transformations. Yeah, so here my invitation once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paula. Very important. Now, Amirul, are you still there? Would you like to say anything or no? I think Amirul has, excuse me, left. Well, I won't even try to summarize. I'm just sorry. I'm just looking to see if Amirul is still there, but no. Yes, he was from the Garment Workers Union, but he left. Okay. Well, I won't even try to summarize because this has been a really rich and fantastic discussion. This is the first in the start of a series, and we do plan to have many more discussions like this every 2 or 3 months on different aspects of on different aspects of rights, freedoms, dignity. Yeah. Oops. Yeah. So we plan to have more webinars like this, more discussions like this, and we will try and plan them for a longer time in the future. I mean, today we planned it for an hour, 45 minutes, but it's clearly gone over time because there has been so much interest. So subsequent discussions will be more focused perhaps on particular instruments, particular actions, particular sectors. And we hope that all of you will join us again, and more of your contacts and people's in your allies and networks will join us, and more movements and activists will join us. And we will be able to build a groundswell of resistance to the violations of rights and freedoms by various actors, state and non-state. So before I close, Andy, would you like to say anything on this point, or Brid, or any of my colleagues?
No, just to say that very simply, this has been a testimony to the importance of listening, respectful collaborations, building and strengthening resilience across sectors and above all people. It's been very, very inspiring, and I thank all the participants.
So thank you. Yes, and I thank all the participants again, and I thank the panelists for doing such a splendid job, despite the fact that we all had such a short time, but you really moved the discourse and forward, and I think brought us all to a much higher level of knowledge and praxis in moving forward. So thank you very much. A special thank you to Anu, Chinoy, and Bishnu, who have been doing all the communications and outreach and then doing all the technical support for this webinar. Thank you so much for everything you've done. And they are also going to be the people who will be putting up the posters and the recording on the AAPF website, which will be, as Anu said, will be available in a few days. And once again, very big thank you to the interpreters and to Christina from La Via Campesina and to La Via Campesina for making the interpretation possible. So I hate saying goodbye, but we meet again and the struggle continues.